Our campus community is blessed with so many amazing people who embody BYU-Idaho's mission to develop disciples of Jesus Christ, who are leaders in their homes, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and in their communities. We want to introduce you to some of them and let you hear their stories. This is the BYU-Idaho Disciple Journeys podcast. I'm Isabella Salazar. My interview today is with Allison Leeks, and this is Allison's journey. I'm here with Allison Leeks, who is a freshman studying childhood development at BYU-Idaho. She's from Canada, and she is a convert to the church. So, Allie, first, can you take me back to when you were introduced to the church? How did that happen?
Yeah. So in my freshman year of high school, after my first semester, I actually changed high schools. And so I was raised in a family that spoke all English, but they put me in French school. And so I went to French school my whole life. And then after my first semester of English high school, I was like, no, I need to go back to French. I don't understand anything. And so I went to French school. And there is kind of where I was introduced to a friend group with two guys who I got pretty close with. And I sat beside one of them in my first period English class, and he had another friend who was on the football team. And we had this thing called Powder Puff, which is just women's football, that you go to raise money for breast cancer, and someone from the football team coaches you and a group of girls. And so Aaron is one of the coaches that I met there. And then we went on just to become pretty good friends. We went to a couple leadership camps together. It was like overnight camps where we kind of talked and got to know each other. And I quickly realized he was a lot different than the rest of the guys who I was friends with. Same with the Owen, who sat beside me in my first period English class. They were just both very different. And so it sparked a little interest in me.
Yeah. In what ways were they different?
So I guess in high school where I'm from, there's no members of the Church of Jesus Christ. We were the only three. Well, I wasn't even a member in high school, but it was just them two that I knew of. And so they acted a lot different in the way that they didn't go to parties and drink and do drugs, and they didn't swear. And that was a huge one that I noticed, that they didn't swear. And so it was like kind of weird, but I kind of liked it. It was like, you're really different than a lot of the people I hang out with, and I felt good when I was around them. So I don't know why. It was just kind of, they just were different.
That's cool. So there was only three of you, kind of two of you.
Yeah.
So how big was your school?
Our graduating class was pretty big. I don't know the exact population of our school, but it was in the thousands, I would say. Our graduating class had around 200-ish, which I know it's not massive. It was Canadian high school, so they're not as big as American ones.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what made you, so did you ask about like why they were different, or did they just kind of mention that they're members? What was that like?
Yeah. So I became really close with Aaron, and we talked for a long time, and we kind of started liking each other. And eventually, after about like 6 months of us just talking, everyone was like, why aren't you dating? Why aren't you dating? And then we started dating. And then about a month after we started dating, kind of throughout that month, I realized that he's a lot different than the other guys. You know, they expect certain things in high school relationships. And I wasn't really, going for all of that kind of thing. But I was kind of curious because he was a football player, the stereotypical jock. Like, I was expecting that kind of thing. But he was very different. And so I remember one night, I forget how the conversation started, but I did end up asking. I was like, why are you so different? I kind of bluntly asked that. And he replied, I distinctly remember him saying, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I was like, whoa, what even is that? And he proceeded to show me a For the Strength of Youth pamphlet, which is pretty bold for a 15-year-old guy on a football team. I think that was like when I realized that what was different about him had to do with God. And so I didn't grow up in a religious home whatsoever. My parents had the, the ability to allow their children to choose what they want. They didn't want us to be raised in a certain religion. And so I believed in God, but that was pretty much it. I visited a bunch of different Catholic and Christian churches, but I didn't really associate with it. And so when he had me read the dating section of the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet, I thought that was very different. I was like, wow. And so then I asked him, why do you live the way that you live? Yeah. And it kind of just went from there.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. So is that when you wanted to learn more about the church? Did you start meeting with missionaries at all?
Yeah. So kind of how the conversation went after that is I asked him, why do you live that way? And he said, I hold something called the priesthood. And I had never heard that word a day in my life. I was like, what is that? Yeah. And he explained that it's the power and authority of God. And God gives that to men so that they can do certain things on earth so that they can be bound to God and their families in the next life. And he said that this is a really important thing that he's been blessed with. So he has to live a certain way to be worthy of it. And then he proceeded to explain what eternal families are and what temples are. And he showed me pictures of temples. And he explained that Joseph Smith was able to receive the priesthood, and he was the first prophet of the Restoration. And he went through the whole Restoration with me. And then that led to the conversation about the Book of Mormon. And I think that's what kind of, to answer your question, kickstarted my desire to learn more, was the Book of Mormon. I had read the Bible, a couple verses of the Bible at Bible camp I went to when I was a kid, and that is what really sparked my interest, was the Book of Mormon.
Wow. Well, he sounds like such a good missionary.
I know, right?
That's as a teenager explaining all of that. Good for him.
It was impressive, and I now know, looking back and after being really close with his family, there was another boy that he was friends with that went to a different high school, and collectively those three families, there was more than those three families, but those three families really introduced me to the gospel, and they're the ones who had me in their homes at dinner and for youth activities, and they just took me in as their own, and they really just taught me everything I know about the gospel. It was through those families. And so it was definitely an example of what he was raised in. And they also had the missionaries over all the time, just even before I came in the picture. They just always had the missionaries over. So he definitely learned from the best.
That's awesome. So he told you about the Book of Mormon, and that's kind of what sparked your interest. Is that the point then when you wanted to meet with missionaries, or did you just start reading the Book of Mormon? Yeah,
so he actually showed me the Gospel Library app, and I didn't have a physical copy of the Book of Mormon until about a year after I learned about the church. And I started reading it on my own. I would ask him questions, and he would answer me, and we would even read together sometimes, which was really cool. And then I was like, okay, I really want to learn more. And he didn't want me to do it for him, and so he kind of just left it to me to do on my own research with the Gospel Library app and reading and everything like that. And so when I finally came to him, I was like, okay, do you have a church I can go to? I kind of want to explore this more. And he invited me to talk to my parents about it before I went to church. And that's when it kind of became, my parents they thought I was young, and, I had this boyfriend, and so they thought maybe that was because of that. And so that was pretty hard for me because they didn't want me to go to church. And so I had to continue researching it on my own, and I wasn't allowed to meet with missionaries because missionaries need permission to teach anyone below the age of 18. And so they didn't have that permission, and I look back and I think of, myself being a parent, I would totally do the same thing. Oh, my daughter's investigating this weird church. But so I mainly just learned the gospel from those families. I never met with missionaries until I was turning 18. And the missionaries were always over at these people's houses, and I would see them around. And then eventually my parents met Aaron's parents and my friends in the church, and they realized, these people are amazing. And so they eventually let me go to church a few times. I went to some youth conferences where I met my best friends to this day, and I went to some dances and everything like that. And these youth lived hours and hours and hours away from each other because the church was so small.
Wow.
And so we would have sleepovers, and it was just so fun. And so that's kind of how I began to learn more about the church, is through youth. Actually, like the youth taught me more than any other person has, and his parents especially. And so eventually I did meet with missionaries, and they're amazing. I'm still friends with my missionaries to this day.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. So at what point did you want to get baptized?
Pretty much as soon as I learned about it. As soon as I learned what baptism was. I don't remember the day that I learned what baptism was. I don't really remember anyone even inviting me to be baptized. I don't think anyone ever did. I just knew that I wanted to be baptized. And I remember going to this young women's sleepover, and someone from the stake presidency at the time came, and they were talking about missions. And I knew I wanted to go on a mission because I met these amazing sisters, Sister Stapley and her companion, and they were talking about how they wanted to go on missions, and I was like, I want to be like you sisters one day. And Sister, I don't remember her maiden name, but she's now Sister Rigby. And she talked about how the gospel has blessed her family and her life. And I just remember both of those sisters, just their light, and I was like, I want to be like them. And at this young women's sleepover, the stake president asked, like, who in this room wants to serve missions? And I raised my hand, and he was like, what's your name, sister? And I told him my name, and he was like, so what are the steps that you need to take to go on a mission? And I was like, well, I think I need to be baptized first. And I think that's when I realized, like, I really wanted to be baptized. And I would think I was 16 at that point.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. That's really cool. So you later got baptized.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, can you tell me a bit about that?
For sure. Yeah, so when I turned 18, I got baptized a couple of weeks after I turned 18. And at that point, the missionaries did have permission to baptize me, so I was meeting with missionaries all the time. I was even going out and teaching with missionaries. I was joining lessons, and so they taught me all the lessons. And Sister Barnes was one of my missionaries, and Sister Pullman. Both of them were my missionaries right before I got baptized, and the day of my baptism, they just kind of helped me through it. I remember being really stressed on the day of my baptism because it was during COVID, and so I only had 10 people at my baptism. My parents actually came, which was a huge deal for me, and my closest friends did, and Aaron baptized me. And
That's really cool.
It was really sweet. He did it right before he left on his mission. And I just remember after Aaron's mom, her name's Adrienne, she told me she could tell I was a little stressed. And so she said, go in the bathroom right now and just write all of your feelings and pray. Kneel in the bathroom and pray, and come back, and then we'll get started. And so I did. I remember this overwhelming feeling of the Spirit just telling me what you're doing is right. I've had, throughout the whole process of almost 3 years, I had a lot of backlash. I had a lot of hate and discrimination against me joining the church because no one knows what the church is, and if they do, they know negative things. And so I remember just having that huge weight on my shoulders of, the world pushing back on this decision. And then when I prayed, I knew it was right. And so I went back and we sung some hymns and had some talks. And then I remember walking into the water, and Aaron was already standing in the water. And I remember looking at him and thinking, oh my gosh, this is happening after so many years. It's actually happening. And I get in the water and I turn towards everyone watching me. And I had this big Zoom TV in front of me of all the missionaries across the 3 years that had taught me.
Wow.
And one of them even had a kid. Pretty much all of them were married.
Crazy, yeah.
And I just remember seeing that big audience. Even though they weren't physically there, I felt it. I felt like angels were in the room too. And I closed my eyes and I was baptized. And as I came out of the water, it felt like the most, as I went in the water, I felt like I was being cleansed. I can't really describe that feeling, but it felt like everything in my life that was negative was completely washed away. And when I came back out, I felt really light, physically light. And I also saw physical light. I opened my eyes, but all I could see was white. And it was a very unique experience. And I remember everyone who watched me be baptized said that I came out of the water, my eyes were really big because they were like, it was almost like you were trying to see, but you couldn't. And I really couldn't see. All I could see was brightness, and it was just so amazing. And then I remember Aaron hugging me, and it felt like it wasn't even him hugging me. It felt like a hug from my Heavenly Father. And then I was confirmed, and it was a very indescribable feeling being confirmed. It felt like this rush of hot, hot water. And it was like tingly almost. Wow. But I had, everyone has the light of Christ in them before they're baptized. And I definitely felt that. I knew the Book of Mormon was true. I had read it 2 times before I was baptized. And I knew Joseph Smith was a prophet. And I knew that we had living prophets today. Like, all of those witnesses of truth came by the light of Christ. And so I didn't really think I would feel anything different when I received the gift of the Holy Ghost. But then when those hands were laid upon my head, it felt like something physically was put in the center of my chest. And I remember driving to the little potluck after my baptism at a cottage, and Aaron looked over at me in the car and said, "You look like you have something different about you now." And so I knew it was like a literal difference. It was just a really good experience.
Wow, that is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
And so that was when you were 18?
Yeah, I was 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then did you start your mission like when you turned 19?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I started my mission papers immediately as I could. And I received my mission call after 8 or 9 months of being a member. And I received my mission call with, again, it was kind of during COVID. So it was in the year 2020. And it was 2021 when I received my mission call, and I opened out my front lawn with my family and my friends, and I remember thinking, this is such a random mission call. I knew I was going to Canada because it was COVID, so I accepted that, and I was actually really happy about that. It was good for my parents because I think they would go crazy if I went somewhere else.
Right, yeah.
And it was to Canada, Calgary, and I was speaking the language Tagalog. And I didn't even know what that was.
Yeah. When you think Canada, you don't really think Tagalog.
No, you don't. Maybe French. Like, you could think French. Yeah. But I already spoke French, so I didn't want to go French speaking. And one of my friends who I'd met at a steak conference or something like that, her name's Meg, and she actually received the same mission call 3 or 4 weeks before I did, and I watched her mission call. And so I asked her, I was like, "What's Tagalog?" And she was like, "Allie, you really don't know what that is? I'm Filipina. Like, that's my first language." And I was like, "Oh, that's so embarrassing. I'm so sorry." And so that's how I learned about it. It was like literally 3 weeks before I got my call. And so she started the MTC way before I did because I had to wait for my baptismal date to pass for me to be endowed. Mm-hmm. And so she was already out in the mission field for quite a while before I got there. She actually ended up being my trainer,
wow,
which is crazy.
That is crazy.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I got my mission call and I left. I got endowed about a week or 2 after my baptismal date anniversary. And it was the most amazing experience. I loved being endowed. The temple was such a sacred and peaceful place for me. I know a lot of people's experience being endowed is a little different, but for me, it felt like the most right thing I'd ever done to that day. And I had a lot of support on that day too, and it was amazing. And then I left for the MTC. I did 2 weeks online in Lethbridge, Alberta, actually. So in my mission, I had a family friend invite me to do my home MTC for 2 weeks in their home, and it was amazing. That's the Stewart family. I love them so much. And then I went to the Provo MTC for the other weeks, and I was a solo sister in the MTC, so I had elder companions, which was really weird.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, not many people have.
So, okay, how does that work? Like, do you
weird.
still have to be within sight and sound of each other?
Yeah, so they would like pick me up outside of my, I guess you could call them dorms. I don't really know what they're called, but my housing. And they would walk me to class. I always had to be with 2 elder missionaries or a sister missionary. Like, I had roommates, but they were in different districts as me, so we had different timetables. And so I was always with elder companions. I did companionship study with them. I did TRC, like, role plays with them. And I had a lot of sister friends, and I would go to lunch with like my sister friends and everything because I needed a break. But yeah, that's how it worked. It was really weird.
That is very interesting. Wow.
Yeah. I was the only sister in the MTC learning Tagalog. That's why.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in the mission fields
Yeah.
amongst the Filipino people. What was that like?
It was incredible. I got there and my mission president and his wife picked me up, and I met my trainers who are Sister Brooks and Sister Jensen, and they explained to me how we have 3 Filipino wards in the city of Calgary, and then 1 branch in a little town called Okotoks, and then a little branch in a town called Tabor, and that I'll primarily be serving there. And I also covered an English ward, and so I kind of got the best of both worlds, transitioning to speaking a new language and everything. And it was amazing. I met the best people I know to this day in those wards, and they are just such an exemplary people of disciples of Jesus Christ. They sacrifice so much to leave their country and everything they know to start a new life, and they are just such a faithful people. Like, Filipinos know how to live the gospel and know how to live it with all diligence. They are very diligent people.
Yeah, like in what way? Like, do you have any examples?
Yeah. So all of them sacrificed a lot to come to Canada. And a lot of them had very prestigious careers in the Philippines, and they come here and they're not even qualified. And so they know what it's like to start at rock bottom. And I think it's what gets them through is their faith in Jesus Christ. They know that they are with their families together forever because of the temple. They know that the Book of Mormon has power, and they know how to share the gospel like no one I've ever seen before. They are just so fearless. And so these members would just live the gospel, and people would ask them about the way they live, kind of just like the same story as me, and they would be they would not hold back when they shared the gospel. They'd be like, come to church. Actually, they wouldn't really ask. They'd kind of just grab their arm and pull them to church. And you would ask, what are you doing at church? Who brought you? And they'd be like, oh, it was Tita so-and-so. And we're like, oh yeah, she definitely would. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I could give billions of examples of people that lived the gospel fearlessly. And it was just, it all started at the core of them knowing the gospel to be true for themselves first. And then that just radiated on other people.
Yeah, that's really cool. How did their example influence you, I guess, moving forward? How did it change you?
Oh, it changed me completely. Just to see what they had to go through. I had a sister that I served with. We called Tita and Tito, just out of respect as sister and brother, but it means auntie and uncle. Tita Rodelas, she had a husband who worked away, and that was really hard for her because he worked in a different province, and she just loved the gospel so much, and her testimony would literally pierce your heart. She made anyone cry, and we would always ask her to come to lessons, and she would. She would leave work and she would come to lessons with us, and she would testify with all her heart. Every time she testified, the person that heard her testimony would cry, and
wow.
Eventually they would be baptized. It was just amazing how powerful her conversion was. And she was so involved with the missionaries that she actually quit her job to be a full-time missionary.
Really?
Not actually, but she would...
Just to go to lessons with you guys.
Yep. And then
wow.
Eventually at the end of my mission, she was called to be the Relief Society president of that ward, and she knew how much of a sacrifice that would be on her part, and she took it, even though she didn't feel like she could. I just remember her telling me that she went to the temple, and she received this answer that she can do it. And it was she's like, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it. And there was other examples of, members that would come to lessons after they had just worked 12 hours and were going to a night shift, 2 hours later, but they had time for a 30-minute lesson with the missionaries.
Wow.
And there was other recent converts who literally laid down their life for Jesus Christ and took up a new life with him, and then went on to serve in callings, and it was just amazing. It was so good.
Yeah. Wow, that is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious if you have any advice for someone who might be new to the church,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say to them who are still trying to familiarize themselves with maybe some of our culture or just
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I would just say the Filipinos would say kaya mo yan. It means you can do it. It's super simple, but they would always say that, and it's just, to break that down, you can do a lot of hard things with Jesus Christ. If you're not baptized yet, you have the power of the Book of Mormon to rely on, the testimonies of Jesus Christ, and that will teach you more about life than anything else would. And I would say to them that you have prayer. I relied upon prayer so much. I would actually pray in my closet because I was afraid anyone would walk in on me praying.
That's what Jesus says to do, too.
I know. I found that out later. I was like reading that in Matthew. I was like, what the heck? I was doing this all along. And so find your prayer place and just spend time with Jesus as much as you can. And you'll find answers to the questions you have in the Book of Mormon. I had very specific questions in the Book of Mormon, answered them. And I remember hearing in a general conference once before I was baptized that the Book of Mormon holds power. And I was like, how on earth does a book hold power? And I put that to the test, and I found that to be true. I also would say to build relationships in the church. Those are what is going to save you. Even for people who feel like they might be losing grip of their testimony or feel like they don't have time for the gospel or, priorities in life just have been misplaced, I would definitely say find relationships in the church that you can, lean on. Everyone needs a time in their life to lean, and you need that sometimes before you move forward. I also would say the atonement of Jesus Christ is the most crucial thing to learn about and to also use. He is a perfect being. He's also descended below rock bottom to lift you up. And so he knows everything you've gone through, which is such a corny, cheesy thing that everyone says, but it's just factual. He really does. And you have a loving Heavenly Father who also understands that. So just the basics of the gospel will take you farther than anything else will. Just go back to the basics and learn about those, and go to the temple if you can. And if you can't work to get there with the atonement, and you can get there.
I love that. Thank you.
Of course.
I know that you haven't been at BYU-Idaho super long.
No, I haven't.
But for the amount of time you have been here, how has it helped you draw closer to Christ?
I think being around an atmosphere that holds the Spirit is definitely a big game changer for me. I did a year of university before my mission, and the difference of the atmosphere is very apparent. I definitely thought it was weird when I walked in the first day of classes and we prayed and sang hymns. I was like, that is so interesting. I am not used to that.
Most people think of when they think of college.
Not at all, because like I said, where I'm from, there's not a lot of members. And so I was used to, some of my professors even swore in class, and I just thought it was normal. Like it didn't put me off guard or anything. I just, they came here and we prayed and we sang hymns, I was like, what the heck? So the difference is definitely drastic. And, culture shock of joining the church is one thing, and then going to a church school is another thing. It's good though. It's something that I enjoy. I enjoy walking around campus, and people are so nice, and you can definitely see Christ-like attributes in your professors. And so I love to learn from these people. I'll be in my nutrition class, and it will be connected to the gospel. I'll be in another science class, and it's also connected to the gospel. I didn't even know it could be.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the BYU-Idaho Disciple Journeys podcast, a production of BYU-Idaho Radio. A special thanks to our guest, Allison Leeks. Our theme music is by Sophia Pack, and I'm Isabella Salazar. You can listen to more episodes on your favorite podcast app or find us online at byui.edu/radio.